right, man.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to, this is episode 4 of the OGIS podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm super grateful to have my friend Josh Jimenez here with me today. And he is a very interesting man, a professional chef for 16 years.
Yeah.
And also an adventurer and a man of many, many interesting things. So today I'm super excited to welcome Josh on here. Would you mind introducing yourself, telling the people a little bit about yourself and what you're into?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. Just like Josh was saying, there's a lot that I've been through. So 16 years as a professional chef, that's kind of where a lot of my career started. That led into getting into restaurant openings, business development, which took me around the U.S. So I started off in California. Originally, I grew up in Japan, funny enough. A military kid, was lucky enough to experience that. And then went to San Diego for college, and that's where I got introduced to the world of sushi by some of my friends in school that were already doing it. And from there, I turned that into a career. That took me, like I said, 16 years, took me around the U.S., landed me in different places like Texas, Minnesota, Washington, San Francisco. Ultimately, I ended up in Sacramento for a bit. Did a lot of work there with this one company where I was helping them expand their business, kind of like a franchise. And in that process, I ended up getting more and more involved in things in San Francisco, where I found this company called Off the Grid that was doing a lot of food truck startups, and running and coordinating events for food trucks. And that was my first real exposure to like business development for small businesses, helping people get off the ground in like the startup fashion. But that also exposed me to the world of tech. And so when I found that world, I got really interested in it because if you know anything about San Francisco and the Bay Area, like one meal can cost you $25. Like, and that's just the food, not including a drink, right? And I'd be running these events, these food truck events with all of these people showing up. And I'd see these young 20-year-olds going in and just buying everything off of a menu. And I'm like, you're about to drop like $120 just for yourself to eat food today. And I was like, what do you do for a job? And they're all like, we're all software engineers. And I was like, how do I become one of those? Okay. And I literally made that transition. So I went from being a chef and, kind of what's the right word here? Consultant.
Okay.
Into software engineering. And I got a job as a software engineer for a few years, really liked it, but also crossed into the world of what they call customer success, which is like helping companies make sure that their products are being used successfully so people will stay on longer. Because if people aren't familiar with the type of business model a lot of tech companies use, it's subscription-based. Because the longer they can get you buying their product, the more money they're going to make. Right. So that's why you'll see a lot of products now, even games, they're all about subscriptions as opposed to just, hey, pay me once and you get my product. No, it's like, hey, pay me a little bit now, but you're going to keep paying me a little bit for the next few years and I'll make more money that way. Right.
Right.
So that was kind of the world that I got into after that, was making sure people connect with products.
Okay.
And stay with them longer. And so that's the career field I'm in now. So I moved here to Colorado Springs to help out my friends with their company kind of do the same thing. Okay. Where it's just like connect the people that are their customers with their product for longer.
So can we talk about how was the transition going from being a chef to a software engineer?
Oh, man. I've seen many iterations of it, meaning like everyone that I experienced that transition with, we all came from different places. So it all starts with the decision to give everything up, essentially. When people were this was right before COVID happened. So this was like 2017, 2018-ish. And in order to make that transition, all of a sudden, all these boot camps, they call them boot camps, little mini schools. They're not certified schools across the U.S., but what they are good at is giving people the skill sets to do the job. Because once you are exposed to that world, you'll realize that they actually don't care about your degree. There are certain roles, of course, like if you're trying to get in the top 1% of companies, they're going to care, right? But in the general like job field, if you can code, then you can code. And that's all they cared about. So all these schools popped up for that, right? But that transition really starts with you deciding, hey, I'm going to give up this successful career. This was my conversation with myself. I was like, hey, I have a successful career in food. Like I'm doing well, but I want to do better in life, like long term, and getting away from the food scene would be nice. So in order to make that transition a real thing, I had to give everything up. I was like, all right, I had to give up that whole career and really commit, because there's a lot of people that try to do it. They'll try to start coding. They'll try to get into software engineering, and they'll spend years just studying random languages and random coding, learning how to code, but never really diving deep enough to take it seriously, right? Some people successfully make that transition, but majority of them won't. And what it really comes down to is just like saying, hey, I really want to be this, and I will spend all of my energy to do that. You know, that was that first step that I had to take, which was, hey, I'm going to do this. So, like I said, I gave up my old career, told my whole family, like, hey, I'm not going to have income for like the next year, 2 years, possibly 3, maybe at the worst case. And I'm going to try to become a software engineer. That was that first hurdle I had to overcome, because my parents were like, so you're not going to make no money for 3 years? Possibly. And they're like, how are you going to survive? And I was like, well, at that time, I had done well enough for myself to buy a house. I was like, I'm going to sell my house, move myself from Sacramento to San Francisco, and that's going to force me to make it work. Because if I run out of money, well, guess what? I'm coming home.
Feast or famine.
Exactly. And you know, that's really what it takes sometimes. Because I didn't realize until that moment, like when I made that transition and started working towards it, like that not only is desperation a motivator, you know.
Don't get me started, bro.
Yeah. It's not just a motivator. It literally will make you get things done that you never thought were possible. You know, that sense of just like overcoming adversity can literally be born out of desperation, if nothing else.
You get to also, at that point, it's survival.
Right.
It's survival, you know? So, like, was it difficult,
you know,
trying to become a software engineer?
I'll put it this way, like, and this is not to take away from any software engineers that are out there, because they all know this to be true. Anybody can become a software engineer. And when I mean anybody, the fact that all of these schools and companies are actually going out there saying, hey, I want someone that has never coded before. I want someone that used to be a teacher. I want someone that used to be a stay-at-home mom. I want someone who like just did random things, janitors. They're like, we want to transition them into software engineering. The main reason why is to avoid groupthink. Because all of these engineers, if you take the history of software engineering and go back, not saying that there's not any value for them, because there's extreme value for going to like MITs, to going to the Stanfords, to going to the top universities in the US for engineering, right? There's extreme value to that. But they know what the limitation is at this point. They're like, hey, we're going to get guys who know how to like code everything perfectly, blah, 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 but they all think the same because they all study the same things their whole lives. They're all exposed to the same things. But if you think about today's world, tell me something that's not digital that is mainstream in terms of like something exposed to the entire population of the US. They've got apps for everything, right? There's apps for cooking. There's apps for cleaning. There's apps for, like, in San Francisco, there's apps for checking if there's poop on the street. There's literally apps for everything, right? So if you're asking someone who's only studied software engineering to help you build an app for yoga, let's say, and they've never done yoga before, do you think they'll make an app that connects to the people? No. That's why, like, what was that? Around that same time, 2015, a little bit earlier than that, they really started searching out for people who just wanted to code and become engineers from different areas because it gave more perspective, right? That's really where a lot of that whole drive of diversity, equity, inclusion also comes from, is that those different perspectives really feed into better product development. You know?
I see.
That's why people who are always like, hey, I only want certain types of people to join my company, or I only want certain types of people to like do X, Y, and Z, you know? All they're doing is cutting off another source of potential knowledge, potential experience that could join your team, right? I mean, of course, qualify the people if you're hiring, right? But like, that's the real like value of diversity, is that like you're not limiting yourself anymore to just your own bubble, right? You're allowing things to come into that bubble to help it grow, right? And so like that really helps like shift that whole dynamic. And a lot of people don't understand that. They're like, oh no, certain companies will never hire people. I'm like, no, they're always looking. But at the end of the day, it's, can you do the job too, right? And so that's why, like, how hard is it to be a software engineer? It really isn't that hard. If you can do basic math, and math isn't even a prerequisite. You know what the biggest prerequisite is to becoming a software engineer? Thinking. It's logic. Everything engineers write is if statements, meaning if this happens, what outcome do we get? If that happens, what's the other outcome we get? That's all software engineering is. It's just different ways of writing that up. In a nutshell, don't get mad at me, engineers out there, but you know it's all logic.
So one of the things I was thinking while you were talking about the differences for someone who went to, you know, Ivy League to be a software engineer was, would you say, and let me try and get this question correct, is there a difference in their approach, would you say, in terms of someone who went to an Ivy League school? Would you have you worked with people like that?
Oh yeah.
And what are some of the things that you've noticed that because they went to an Ivy League school, they come in ready for? Or
I mean, it's hard to really dial that in because it's going to depend on the job they're looking at, right? Like, especially specifically towards software engineering, if they're getting into big data, AI, or something like that, they're going to have an advantage 100% because they've probably studied things like that, the math that's required, right? The technical understanding, deep language understanding. What I mean in a language, but by like programming languages, right? The folks that go and become software engineers from like boot camps and like from intensive programs and stuff like that, they're literally getting trained to do a job. So you learn specific languages, specific skill sets most of the time, and you're able to do kind of like, I wouldn't say low, like the low level jobs up to like medium tier. But of course, to get to like the most technical jobs, you need to have a background, right? So I would say that the biggest difference that they have is depth of knowledge, not necessarily experience. Because there's plenty of examples out there in the world of engineers who've gone to those Ivy League schools, and then when they get into the real workplace, they're not successful because their mindset was not in the right place, I would say. That is also a difference, is like usually the people coming out of these boot camps, there's a hunger and desire to do good and just to get a job in the first place. We all start off basically in the same realm, right? But those Ivy League folks, the depth of knowledge, meaning like the different languages that they had to study and the amount that they had to study, totally different. Like I could never compete against an MIT person, ever in terms of software engineering, right? But depending on the job, are my skill sets just as good? Sure. Depending on the job. If they're asking me to do machine learning, absolutely not. If they're asking me to do like build websites, build infrastructure for, you know, a storefront, meaning like build a database, build how all that interacts, build how we can handle how many people are looking at the site all at once.
That's what you do?
Yeah.
Or that's the skill set that you work with?
That's some of the stuff I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that happen in the background. There's engineers for everything, though. So this is one thing a lot of people don't understand, is that there's engineers for, like I was saying earlier, it's just like that diversity of like what the products are. That's the realm of software engineering. Like people are always like, oh, software engineering is not cool. I'm like, I have a lot of friends that have gotten to software engineering in the music industry to build products for the music industry, to build products for photography. And I'm like, their jobs are cool, super cool. You talk about fashion. There's software engineers that help like fashion companies build. Do you think Nike's website runs on its own? Like, no, they have a huge engineering team, that helps them build those experiences out, and there's a lot of science that goes behind it. So like software engineering to me is kind of an interesting like frontier space in terms of the job market, because it is a reflection of the existing world. Like it's a reflection of the job market itself. It's like the more people want to get into food, well, hey, there's going to be more food apps that pop up. What does that mean? There's going to be more food software engineering jobs popping up.
Right. Wow. That's really neat. That's really neat.
This is crazy.
Whenever I thought of software engineers, I don't think I had ever really thought about what it meant to be a software engineer.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say are some of the pros to being a software engineer, and what are some of the difficulties of being a software engineer?
Pros, I'd say it's pro and a con, is being exposed to the tech world. It's a different lifestyle. It's a different world. It's a different community. And depending on how you approach it, it could either change your life or hurt your life. Meaning, like, there's people who get into software engineering because a lot of companies create these little micro ecosystems, right? So, like, everyone hears about Google campuses. They provide all the food, they provide showers, they provide gyms, there's free Wi-Fi. You hear about stories about people buying, like, U-Haul trucks, putting them in the parking lot, putting a bed in it, and that's where they live, so that they don't have to pay anything and they get to collect their whole paycheck, right? But that's a pro, because, hey, they're going to provide for you to have a certain lifestyle. They'll even feed you, right? That's so cool. And you're on this cool tech campus that has everything. The downside of that is that you end up not stopping working.
I see.
Right? It's so easy. It's like almost getting in the zone. Like, it's getting to like this flow state. A lot of engineers, like, they read a lot and they get into all those kind of things. So the flow state is a common thing that a lot of engineers will talk about sometimes. It's just like, hey, you start coding and you look down and you're just looking at your screen, then you look up, all of a sudden it's like 6 a.m. again, and you started at 8 a.m. the previous night, the previous day, right? Happens all the time to a lot of engineers. And that's the hard part about it, is that that's also the expectation of the people that own the companies. Is like, hey, what kind of benefits can I provide? Kind of mask the amount of work that these engineers are actually going to do. Right? They keep track of it. They try to do their best to try to manage that or whatever. But that is the mindset that just naturally happens. It's almost toxic in the startup world, where they underhire people. Like, hey, we're building a new company. How do I get the most out of all these people I'm hiring without having to hire more, so I don't spend more money, right? So a lot of startups take advantage of that. It's almost like, you think about when Twitter and Elon Musk took over and converted it to X, right? And he's like, well, we're going to kick out all these engineers that care about diversity, equity, inclusion, that care about like being good people, stuff like that. But then he's like, I only want to hire the engineers that are here to kick ass, that want to work the 20-hour workday every single day. Stuff like that. Very inaccurate portrayal of that whole situation, but it's along those lines, right? Because he knows that there's people that are like that in the engineering world. They just want to grind and they just want to build things.
So word on the street is he's kind of like that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, here's the other thing, is I don't knock him or any other person that's like that, because it's just a difference of how we all approach the world. Like, at the end of the day, my real skill set is people. Understanding people, communicating to people. And there are people out there who are just hyper-driven, hyper-motivated. And I don't think it's a fair statement to say that those people are crazy. I don't think it's a fair statement to say that they're not valuable at all, because I genuinely think that those are the people that push the envelope. They help innovate. Like, innovation doesn't come from people who are stagnant. They're not people who are consistent. What they are is they're consistently aggressive in whatever it is they're doing, right? Because if they aren't trying to be unique, if they aren't trying to push the next evolution of whatever it is they're doing, well, then we're all making the same thing.
Dang, bro.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, without the Elon Musks, do we actually think that EV vehicle like evolution would be happening as fast as it is right now? All of a sudden,
Everybody wants to make electric vehicles.
exactly. And not only that, they're regulating it. The government is regulating it now. That didn't happen before. That wasn't even on the roadmap for most of these politicians 5, 8, 10, 12 years ago. But the moment Elon showed everyone that electric vehicles were valid, boom, all of a sudden other companies really start diving into the technology again, because it's kind of come back from, like, what was that, the 1960s or whatever, they actually had EVs. But now governments are regulating it. That never used to happen. Why? Because they were afraid, like, big oil really ran that. But now they're like, okay, we find opportunities to get in here because people are demanding it, right? And when we think about just anything else, you think about fashion. I mean, did you buy Kanye's slides?
No.
The whole...
My friend Boo Boo did.
Mm-hmm.
Boo Boo bought a few of them. And which, it was kind of genius how he did it.
Yeah.
Same price for everything.
Mm-hmm.
Made like $20 million in sales in a week, I think.
And I'm just like, those things, to me, I mean, no shade if anyone who's listening bought them, but I was like, those don't appeal to me visually. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
I'm hating on it in that sense, but I'm just like, but I'm also appreciative of it, because I'm like, dude, that's just someone thinking differently. Every time
I was going to say,
yeah,
that's a very innovative way to do business, because people rush to the site and it didn't matter what you wanted. It's all the same price. Whatever you want on here is $20.
uh-huh.
And I think he limited it to 1 or 2, like per
person or IP or whatever.
Yeah, because people would just buy it all and then try and resell it.
Mm-hmm.
So he was like, yeah, you get 2. That's it.
Yeah.
So,
and I mean, I use him as context because it's the easiest one to like look at in terms of like, he pushed fashion forward in an urban sense, right? Urban fashion. And it's like, you could take that category in any other space. We look at food, before Gordon Ramsay was Gordon Ramsay, there wasn't a lot of exposure for a lot of chefs. And when he was exposed, what did people think about him? They all hated him. They're like, he's so mean. He's such an angry chef. The funny thing is, on the back end of that, coming from the food world, every food person I know is like, dude, he's normal. I've seen way meaner chefs, right? But because he was radical, because he was different, he wasn't what the ideal picture of in the mainstream, he pushed the envelope. All of a sudden, boom, being a celebrity chef, Food Network, all that explosion, right?
mm-hmm.
That's not from being consistent with what's the norm. That's with always pushing the envelope. That's what creativity, is. That's what it sparks, right? So, like, like it's that crazy part of, I think, what being human is. It's like, that's the coolest part.
Yeah. So, I've definitely grown to appreciate Gordon Ramsay, because, like, a few years back, I was like, I thought the same thing. I was like, man, I don't know if I could take somebody talking to me like this, So I used to watch like Jamie Oliver, because he was just way more relaxed, way more chill. Now, and this is where there's a big difference between Jamie Oliver and Gordon Ramsay. Ramsay's a lightning rod. Hate him or love him, you're gonna watch him.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That's the one thing with Gordon Ramsay. So he draws everybody in. Jamie Oliver, way more chill, keeping it laid back, showing you how to get it done, right? So there's a different crowd that goes to Jamie Oliver, And even for me, I went to Jamie Oliver because I was like, I just don't like the way he just talks to people. But Gordon Ramsay's completely different with kids.
Right.
If you watch the way he treats kids, he's much more gentle, a bit more instructional.
Do you see what that is, though? That's still him. It's the same person.
Right.
It's not necessarily just because it's a different audience. He's still the same person when he's yelling at an adult. It's just he understands there's a different way you communicate to an adult because the risk is higher. Or I don't want to say risk. I'm looking for a specific word here. I keep coming back to like the juice is worth the squeeze kind of statement, but it's like when we're adults, the things we're doing, like he's working in professional kitchens.
Yes.
Right?
Stakes are higher.
That's what it is.
Yes. The stakes are higher when you're...
and they're good too.
Yeah.
But like, a mess up is impactful. Whether it's his business or someone else's, if he's coaching you in cooking something, he needs to make sure you do it right.
Right. Because the thing with that is we may only go to his restaurant. That may be our one and only time we go to his restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
That experience is absolutely critical. First impressions last forever.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if we go to his restaurant and whatever we ordered wasn't, I hate the word mid, I can't stand that, especially in anime world, because everybody wants to just like dilute everything with the word mid, but it's, if we go to the restaurant and it wasn't up to expectations of what you expect when you hear the name Gordon Ramsay is behind it, even if he's not cooking the food, that's Gordon Ramsay's restaurant. So there's an expectation that comes with that, right? So
Absolutely.
I definitely, now that I've grown a little bit more, I understand the intensity behind it because every single person that comes in wants to feel as special as that person that went, damn, that was the best meal I've ever had. They also want to leave going, what a killer steak that was. What a killer dish that was, So I definitely have grown to appreciate Gordon Ramsay much more now, And so I think that's one of those things where time will tell.
Yeah.
Right? It's, you got to give it time and you just got to keep watching type of thing,
And I mean, kind of just pulling that back into what we were talking originally about, like kind of, what was it? We were talking about kind of those innovators and like pros and cons of being software engineers, right?
Right.
And it's just the space creates, like the environment can facilitate the different types of personalities and success rates that people experience in that field, right? So innovators push, they demand more, and then there's people that just want to go with the flow, right? And at the end of the day, the way I look at it, no matter whether it's software engineering and if it's good or bad, or if it's food, whether it's good or bad, right? It's, does the person fit the role that they're taking on, right? And does it make them happy enough? I know this is such a cliche thing. It's just like, hey, people have the ability to pick whether a job is good or not. Yeah, to a certain extent, because people also need to be able to sustain a life of some kind, right? Whether it's like just barely making ends meet versus like, making more than you ever need in your lifetime, right? And the part that is hard for a lot of people to understand and grasp that I've learned and I've experienced just by meeting such a diverse group of people in my lifetime is it's always comes down to accessibility. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, we talked about like people who go to MIT versus people like me who went to a boot camp. What's the difference? It's accessibility to like classes that teach you different, like that depth of knowledge that I was talking about. But on top of that, it's accessibility to people in the industry, because there is that, and this is every career field, whether it's software engineering, food, or whatever, right? If you are part of a brotherhood or an alumni group, right, from a certain school, you go to another college or go to a job you apply to at a top tier, whatever it is, restaurant, company, etc., and the person hiring is from that same school, right? It's not that they favor you just because you went to that school. It's because they know that you went through the same struggle that they did and that you were exposed to the same knowledge as they were or something similar to it, right?
Yes.
And that's accessibility. It's understanding like, hey, I have less barriers interviewing a person who I have at least some understanding of what's
something in common,
right? And that's just a very human reaction because we do that all the time with just even walking up to someone. How am I going to say hi to somebody?
Right.
Accessibility isn't just about like, opportunities and stuff. It's literally about how we engage in the world. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
It's like for us as minorities, there's a thing that we all know, that we all do naturally, called code switching. It's where we can adjust how we speak, how we act, how we look, how we feel. Shoot, I sometimes even adjust how I smell based on who I'm going to be around. That's accessibility for us, because if we don't do those things, we lack accessibility.
You don't want to see me in the gym, bro.
No, I don't want to see you in the gym just because you're super fit. No, I don't. No.
When there's a bunch of brothers around, I obviously talk a little different,
Yeah.
The jokes are a little different. That's why I'm laughing, because it's so true,
It's real.
It's so true. Like,
shoot, if we even take it to today's context, look at what's happening with Kendrick and Drake right now. What was one of the hottest lines? He was like, "Why you always code switching?
yeah,
You don't need to be doing.
oh my gosh, bro.
Be yourself,
Bro,
If you're gonna be real."
This is,
Yeah.
and you know what's crazy about that is, and I felt like this was so corny, but also there was a part of me that understood it, was Rick Ross calling Drake a white boy. Rick Ross calling Drake a white boy, I was like, that's that dark skin shit. That's that dark skin brother shit, because Drake gets to play both sides if he feels like it.
Yeah.
He gets to play both sides. That's the advantage of being light skinned,
Yeah.
And that's why Kendrick on we're talking music right now. I'm sorry if you don't know what we're talking about, but we're talking music.
No, we're still talking food because this is beef.
Yeah. Oh, ours. Yeah. So when Kendrick goes, "I hate the way you say the N-word," I kind of felt it. I'm not gonna lie, bro. I felt that.
Yo, it's because he's also Canadian.
Well, I was just like, damn, bro. I really get why some of these men got issues with Drake, like, because just an observer, there's a bit more like, there are times where like you look at Drake, because Drake has said this for a long time, that he feels like he's not accepted by the Black community. He said that.
Oh yeah.
That he doesn't feel like he's accepted by the Black community. And Joe Budden has talked about this on his podcast. I know. I love the Joe Budden podcast.
Wow.
I know. It's the funniest thing ever. And like Drake was talking about how, he doesn't, like, he feels like sometimes he gets discredited that he doesn't do anything for the Black community. And he's like, bro, I do mad stuff for the Black community, but I'm not putting it on Front Street. I'm just not trying to put it out there that I'm really down here doing it. Like, I'm just not Kanye with a camera following me going to Chicago.
Well, so here's my question to you, though, in terms of that. I know we're in this different segue here, but like, do you think it's fit? Like, do you think it's necessary for him? Like, if we take it down to kind of like the bare bones of it all, he's not from the U.S. Yeah, he's participating in a culture that was born out of the U.S., but so does the whole world, right? And this is a constant conversation, even for like the Japanese culture, who highly adapts specific things of Westernized culture, right? But we look at Drake from Canada, but super highly successful in the hip hop and pop realm here in the U.S. Does he even owe allegiance to the hip hop community at all?
Number one, Drake spent a lot of time in the U.S. because his dad's from Kentucky.
Yeah.
So that's the thing when you feel like, because Drake is Canadian, but he's got a bit of a nomad feeling to him, because Drake is super big in Canada, but I don't want to say he's bigger in the U.S., but the U.S. just put a spotlight on him.
You can't deny that he's big out here, though. No matter
right.
Even hate is still participating in like supporting that guy.
Right.
Like I don't hate him in the sense that I don't think his music's not good, because his music is obviously good. And I F with a lot of it. But do I think he's like better than Kendrick in terms of hip hop and rap? Because that's what I grew up on. And I'm like, no, not even close. But he's not even in the same genre to me.
Well, and that's where I would say, because they grew up completely different.
Exactly.
They grew up so differently, you know? Their backgrounds is completely different. Drake can't talk about the things Kendrick can talk about.
Mm-hmm.
J. Cole can talk about the things Kendrick talks about.
Oh, yeah.
Drake can't talk about, oh, I saw this growing up. I saw that. You were an actor, bro. You know what I'm saying? You were a child actor. Now, his flow is a bit more of a lifestyle type flow.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like Drake is hip hop. Like money, fast cars, like private plane.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like that is hip hop, you know? But Kendrick is hip hop and rap. Good Kid, Mad City is, in my opinion, I would say top 2 rap albums ever created.
Okay. That's fair,
bro.
I'm not arguing.
That is a movie and a music album.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, we're talking a lot of music, but this is just what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Good Kid, Mad City is a freaking movie and a rap album, bro.
Yeah.
You know, and when Macklemore won over Kendrick, and Macklemore called Kendrick to say, look, I'm sorry, we all know what happened.
Yeah.
We don't need to sit here and talk about it. We all know. Like, I mean.
But here's the thing. I also look at that situation, right? And here's why I didn't really hate the win for him. Don't get me wrong. Shouldn't have won. But I also understand why it happened, and also why that can continue to happen in that category. I call it category because it's not about the actual genre of music. In the genre of music, everyone recognizes what's real. If you're a real hip hop head, you know who the real hip hop artists are. You know who you're really following, and you know who's more hip hop, right? That's where I cross. Like, I think Drake crosses over in more hip hop music as opposed to hip hop music, right? And same with Macklemore, right? It's just that as you expose the rest of the world to the music and the community, right? Now you're basically reverse introducing that accessibility, because we already know as colorful, even for myself, right? I'm not black, I'm Filipino, right? An islander, but I still experience the same things with just color tone in my communities, Asian communities. We're the jungle Asian. The fact that there's a category called jungle Asian amongst Asian
that's crazy. I didn't even know that was a thing.
There's city Asians.
Yeah.
And I know you can guess which ones those are.
Yeah.
Real easy. Then everyone else besides the top 3, we're all jungle Asians.
I see.
Right? But like, we also really relate to a lot of what happens in the hip hop community. Because, well, for me specifically, and for my friends that I grew up with, we all grew up on hip hop. So we recognize that, right?
And this is the one thing that I feel bad for Drake on, is people get mad at Drake for venturing outside of rap.
Oh, yeah.
People really get annoyed and feel like, oh, Drake is the artist you hear at Target, Hobby Lobby.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. What is the issue with somebody venturing out and expanding? You have like hip hop purists who just want bars for 6 minutes. They just want bars and bars and bars for an entire album. Mm-hmm. And Drake talked about the interview he did.
Oh, keep going.
In 2020.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen that. He had Elliot and B-Dot on there.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved that interview when that came. It was so good. What a great interview. Drake, props to you, bro. And he was talking about, like, hip hop is expansion. You know what I mean? Like, it's not just pure rapping all the time. Mm-hmm. It's about style. It's about flow.
But here, let me tie it together to what we've been talking about this whole time. Accessibility, though. as he opens up the genre, as he pushes the envelope there, guess what it does? It makes it more accessible to the rest of the world. What does that mean? That means it feels less relatable to the communities that started the movement. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because if they're looking at Drake and they're like, oh man, the best rappers, they're not from where I'm from. They're from Canada. Oh shoot, they're traveling not anymore. It's like New York's not the place to travel anymore. LA's not the place to travel anymore. They're all going to like Montego Bay or something.
Yeah.
They're going to Morocco.
Yeah.
You know, like I'll never be able to achieve that no matter what I do. It becomes less relatable to them. Right. And that's where like you see it in the evolution of the music, right? Like still music, but like the hip hop community, like it was born out of struggle, right? And they're rapping about their real life situations. It goes from like, talking about partying first and like just making good music, making things feel good out of the disco era, evolving into like the 80s and 90s where it became, the anti-police movement, racial divide in the U.S. And that's where hardcore rap really kind of took off, right?
And that's like the group of like, that's the generation that has a bit more of an issue with Drake.
Mm-hmm.
Is they see Drake as soft.
Yeah. But it's not even about soft, because you look at it even deeper. You take it deeper than that. It's, hey, his music's not relatable to me anymore.
Right.
It's supposed to be my genre of music. This is my identity.
I see.
Do you know what I mean? And that's what I see when I look at this whole thing, because you look at other genres, like even look at Beyonce breaking into country music.
Well, they're not letting her in. They're not playing.
It doesn't matter if they want to let her in or not. She's knocking down the door. And there's enough people there's enough people that she doesn't need to go in. She's making her own house right next door.
Because that's where like there was a whole thing with Jay-Z like having to go on stage and being like, yo, you guys are on Taylor Swift's, you guys are glazing Taylor Swift. I have no issue with Taylor Swift. I listen to her music.
I'm too late.
I love Taylor Swift.
Get them.
Yeah. But like Jay-Z constantly having to defend Beyonce because it's, hey, like, we're watching the bullshit you guys are doing to Beyonce. You know what I mean? And she's got all these numbers as stats, but you guys are absolutely discrediting that.
And that's again, tying it back to our whole conversation. That's always going to happen because people don't want it to not be relatable to them anymore. We could look at that in the context of anything, even anything else we do, right? We look at, the women's right to vote in the U.S. before. That boys club didn't want them to vote. All of a sudden they were asking for it. They put up such a big fight, suffragette movement. Then women finally got to vote after such a big fuss, right? We look at sports today, women and men's sports. Granted, there's so much to be talked about in that particular conversation, but because physicality, build, whatever. In terms of skill sports, where it's just skills and not the physical aspects, I'm of the mind like, hey, there's no difference. There's also a lot of proven science where women's coordination is way better than men's, which is why a lot of women pilots are more successful in the military than male pilots, because their reaction times are higher.
I did not know that.
Yeah, there's actual studies on that. And so like it's really interesting to see like when a certain group of people are threatened by something different or new, it's always defensive first. But then once it opens up, they realize, hey, we were leaving out the opportunities, the expansion, the other perspectives, the other experiences that could have been there from the beginning, right?
So I'll tell you this experience I had.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, hey, I was at a lunch a few years ago for work.
Okay.
And this was an environment where everybody went to college, got a degree, talking fraternity chat.
Right.
And we're talking about how I got into this company, and I got an internship, I got lucky, and looking back at it now, because in real time, I was watching the envy on this man's face when I was telling him, like, I was like, yeah, I got an internship, and that's how I worked my way. and I was like telling him, I was like, I don't think I'm gonna go to college because everything I need to learn, I'm learning here on the job, and it makes no sense for me to go into that much debt to learn this skill that, to be frank, college isn't really gonna teach you as much as being in real time, being in the business and shadowing all these sales accounts as executives. And hey, Josh, you're going to go with this person. You're going to go listen to the conversations being had between a customer and an account holder. You know, you're going to go into the accounting side of things. You're going to learn, you know, how orders are processed. You're going to work with Kimberly, how to make phone calls. All these things that you do before you get to being an account executive, I'm learning, right? And I'm explaining to him, I was like, yeah, I'm just super grateful that I don't have to go to college to learn all of this. And it just wouldn't make sense for me to go back to school right now, because everything I need to learn, I'm doing it here on the job. And the envy that I'm serious, bro. You can see envy on people's faces. And he was looking at me like, who the fuck does this kid think he is to sit here and say this shit to me? You know, like no, like, I'm serious. Like, he just had this look on his face, like, this motherfucker, like, almost like you don't know what I had to do to get to here. And you're telling me you don't need college, because it was more of I went to college so that I could get into this position. Granted, I was lucky. I just got luck on my side my whole life. So take that what you will.
No. So here's what I have to say to that, is that everyone has their own ego. Everyone has their own sense of entitlement that ranges depending on what you're doing and where you're at, right? Now, I love, it's a cliche saying, right? But, you know, everyone's like, be humble in everything you do. And this is the exact scenario where everyone that I speak to and I try to talk to, I try to tell them the same thing. I'm not perfect, right? And I've made mistakes in my life, but what I never try to do is think that in any context, I'm better than the person next to me. In fact, I'm always trying to think, and this is something I had to develop over time, because in my younger stages, I'm like, even with my parents, I'm like, I know more than you. When in fact, you don't. And it's not that, in certain cases, you might have a college education, you might have degrees upon degrees, but there's always going to be something you can learn from somebody else. Absolutely, there's always something, right? And in that context with you know, your previous workplace, it's exact scenario we were just talking about. It's, hey, he had a different path of accessibility. That means that what I did isn't as valuable anymore. And that's what you did to them, right? It's not that you did that on purpose.
Right, because
it was created by your workplace. But also, it's just like, that's his own mental state. Is it, if he didn't understand that you weren't devaluing the work he did, as opposed to you were taking advantage of the opportunities presented to you, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, that's a different way that you approach not only life, but just like things in general, like people, interactions, right? And when you see someone experiencing that, because like I deal with that all the time talking to people, even when I became a software engineer, even in food, they're like, well, how'd you get into food? Well, I apprenticed at a sushi bar. Then like, how do you learn? Well, how did you learn so much about the business of it? I'm like, because I listened, I learned, I dove deep into it. It was my own motivation to get better, not just because I followed a path that was laid out for me already. You know, like, my choices to change career fields all the time weren't my own every single time. It was a lot more born out of necessity, right? And it's just like, hey, if I don't want to be stuck, I need to make changes. Not a lot of people can make that decision. A lot of people are like, oh man, this is the path that I was set on. I can't get off of it. I need to stick through with it to the end. You know, and then if someone criticizes me for that choice, they're like, well, now you're criticizing my whole life. Right? And that's tough. That's a tough conversation to have with anybody, especially in a oh, well, that's also a sales job, right? Mm-hmm. That's hyper competitive. You're talking about a lot of ego goes into that, because that's what it takes to be a sales guy. Not saying that's the only things it takes, but in the context of people getting into sales, that's always kind of like the general personality type that gets picked into those roles. right? Hyper aggressive, hyper driven, self motivated. You value yourself as being the hottest thing on the table because that's the mentality you need going into a call. And if you don't think you're that, then all of a sudden you question your strategies of speak, you question your strategies of sales, you know. And so, you know, a lot of times that's just insecurities pouring through, as opposed to him having turned around and been like, hey, so like, what are some of the things you learned coming up through the internship? Maybe I didn't learn the same things. You know, here, how about I share with you some of the stuff I learned and you share some of the stuff that you learned and we both get better.
Yeah.
You know, like those are different ways to approach those conversations, those interactions with people, because it's going to happen every time. You know, even for, you could apply that to different contexts of situations. You could be going from, like, for me, when I go into some of the neighborhoods here in Colorado Springs, and I'm the first Filipino that someone's ever met, and they're like, what are you doing out here, boy? Kind of conversations. You know, my initial thought is never to get defensive. It's just like, introduce myself, try to meet them at the level they're at, and not make them feel different, not make myself feel different. You approach with like that kind of sense of neutral ground, and people respond to that. It's when you respond to people with like aggression, defensiveness, insecurity, you know, shyness. It's that whole thing where people say, hey, your energy rubs off on other people. You'll get back what you give to them. That's 100% what it is. At the end of the day, we're human, right? The way that we interact with each other, it's going to sound stupid, but it's real. It's vibes. We can feel it, whether that's a real scientific term or not. When you walk in a dark alley and you see someone walking up towards you, before they even get 20 feet from you, you're already making a judgment on them based on how they're walking, based on what they're looking at, based on just the color of the street, right? And you could take that even to here. You walk into a store, you walk up to your shopping, and you want help from a salesperson, right? Everyone's making these slight little adjustments on how they want to interact with you.
Real quick. Hey, Brenda, what time is it?
5:05.
5:05? Okay, cool. All right, cool. We
What
got
time
like 10, 15 minutes.
Okay.
Because we just want to be wrapped up before they get. Yeah.
Absolutely. But you know what I'm saying? It's that at the basic core of how we work as people with other people, right? It always comes down to like our natural reactions to situations and to each other. And that's, you know, that's what you and I talked about before off camera, about like personalities and getting to know people. It's like oftentimes people say, hey, that person's extroverted or this person's introverted, or they just have an easier time making friends, right? And it's for those people that are categorized as it's easy for them to make friends. It's not that they're good at making friends. It's that they're good at reading and understanding how to interact with other people. You know, it's not cheat codes. It's not like breaking barriers or anything like that. It's just every person has their own communication style. Every person has their own interaction style. And if you can unlock that in your own way, if you just understand it, you know, then every time you meet someone, you could present yourself as more approachable. You know, you could present yourself as, you know, kinder, so to speak. You know, or you could do the opposite. Even if you don't want to talk to someone that day and you already know how they interact or whatever, you could also ward them off with how you speak, talk, act, right? So, like, I think that's like the interesting part about being a human, is that like we communicate with more than just words. It's intentions, it's actions, it's poses, right? Your stance, you know, eye contact, no eye contact, eyebrows up, eyebrows down, you know, like all these little nuances of the human body are signals, whether people know that they're giving them or not.
Right. Dang, bro, that was really deep. Nah, that was really good. That was really cool.
I mean, at the end of the day, our whole conversation, yeah, it started off talking about me and my life experience, but it's more like, hey, what was my experience of human interaction throughout my life, and how do I apply that to today's world? Looking at music and the context of where, like, why certain things might be happening in that community, looking at the food world, how we all interpret food. Like, what's the difference between high-end food and low-end food or fast food? At the end of the day, it's all
Price.
yeah, right?
That's
right.
the only difference.
Funny thing is, as you pay more, you get less.
That's what I was gonna say. Like, you ever hit a street vendor for some tacos?
Mm-hmm.
You could get those same tacos that cost you $2.50 at a high end restaurant's like $6 per taco.
No, but they'll also deconstruct it, and it won't even be a taco anymore. It'll be like a salad bowl.
Yeah. I want my food prepared for me. I don't want to have to get it at the table and then put it together.
Yeah.
Unless this is a hot pot,
Yeah.
Now, that's really interesting. So, like, before we go, can we talk a little bit about, like, you growing up in Japan?
Yeah.
Like, how long did you live in Japan?
16 years.
16 years.
Yeah.
Like, from birth until 16?
No. How old was I? I was 5 years old.
When you got there?
Yeah, when I got there.
Okay. And did you speak any Japanese?
Not when I first got there. I barely spoke English. I was a little kid. I was there. I grew up on a military base there from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. There was like one gap year in the middle. It was like half of like 5th and 6th grade because my dad had to come back to the U.S. for the military, and then we went back.
So
Again.
is your father and are both your mom and dad full Filipinos?
Yeah.
Okay. So what was it like growing up in Japan?
Awesome. It was a unique experience. I say awesome and terrible at the same time. In that when you grow up on a military base and you become an adult and your life moves on, you don't have a home to go back to. Like, I see Japan as my home because that's a country I grew up in. But my actual home is on a military base, and if I don't have clearance to go on the base or someone to escort me, I could never go back and see my home.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And, like, there's a lot of us like that. Military kids, like, we're all the same. Like, that's why it's easy when we run into each other, we can relate to a lot of things. Moving around a lot. I mean, fortunately, I didn't have to move around a lot, but a lot of my friends I grew up with, every 4 years, they were moving. And you had to learn how to make friends really quickly. You had to learn how to, like, build a community around yourself really quickly, but also the difference is that when you grow up overseas, like on that military base, and you come back to the U.S., you don't really relate to everyone. It's weird. You relate to everyone because you grew up in an environment, like on the military base, all my friends, super diverse. White, black, Mexican, Japanese, Chinese, whatever. We were all friends because we had to be. I mean, I don't want to say had to be. We all chose to be friends, but like, that mixture was there. Just like when guys say they go into the military, all of a sudden they met all these people that they never met, right? But in even more isolated context, because when we graduate, especially if we only grew up on military bases and we didn't spend any time in the U.S., we come back, we don't know anybody. Hey, what neighborhood are you from? Japan? Oh, cool. What kind of music did you like? They're like, oh, hip hop and rap. What? How'd you like hip hop and rap? You didn't grow up in the U.S. It's tough. You have to break that wall. You have to break that, like, those misconceptions about you and what you know, but also you realize, like, the exposure of the world to a lot of people is limited, right? It's that whole thing. It's just like your sight, you can only see as far as your sight will allow, And if you don't have, like, binoculars or something, you're not seeing outside your neighborhood. You're not seeing outside of your town, your city. This is such a terrible analogy in terms of that, but, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, you do realize, like, a lot of people in the U.S. don't have those opportunities. So I think it was a great experience because of that. Like, I got exposed to so much of the world just by being the child of a military person. But I also got to see, like, the differences in it too. Like, my dad, Filipino, at the time in the Navy, a lot of the Filipinos were only enlisted, meaning, like, they're in the lower ranks. My dad worked really hard, had the opportunity to move up and become an officer. At the time when he first became an officer, there weren't many Filipino officers in the Navy, or at least not on the base, not that I knew, because if there were, I would have met them, right? There was maybe doctors that were Filipino, but that's like different than being in the, like being on the ships and stuff. Like they get treated differently.
Right.
And so my dad also had to overcome that aspect of, hey, you're joining basically the all-white Navy boys club. You need to act the right way, you need to do the right things, and you need to stop hanging out with the Filipinos so much. So that's what he had to do. So a lot of times my friends in the Filipino families are like, hey, how come you're not around all the time at the parties we're throwing on the base, the community get-togethers? Well, it's because my dad needed to isolate himself from them, or else his career would be like dead in the water. And that wasn't, I didn't realize till a lot later. I used to be mad at him all the time growing up. I'm like, hey, how come you don't want to go to the parties? I'm going to go by myself. I'm going to take my sister. We're just going to go. And, you know, he wouldn't say no, but he wouldn't say that he can go to them. He'd have to be very picky because he can't interact with all of them when he has to be the one in charge of them. You know what I mean? And so, like, there were a lot of interesting aspects about growing up in that space. And then also growing up in Japan. Growing up as a kid, you're just like, hey, I'm just a kid in another country. I don't feel any repercussions of anything I do. We were not great. Like, I don't know who decided to let kids run around Japan just freely growing up as teenagers, but we did. And you don't realize, like, how culturally disrespectful you could be.
And they're big on respect, man. Japanese culture, from the very little that I know, they are super big on being respectful.
Oh yeah, and it's not just Japan; it's just everywhere else in the world, right? And that was my first foray into learning about like cultural respect, which I think is a huge benefit. Is just like, hey, when you learn that first lesson of, hey, you're in another country, you need to learn respect for that country, not just because you're from the U.S., you're better than everyone. Then you come out here, then you start traveling with friends who never had that exposure. And you're like, oh, this is why the rest of the world hates the people from the U.S. You know, they're like, oh, man, they have disregard for everything that we hold valuable in our country. Right? And you're like, oh, man, that sucks. Like, you're acting like such an a-hole in this other country, but it's also you've never experienced going outside of your own country. You don't know that, like, your country's not the best at everything. Not saying the U.S. is not the best at everything or it's not, like, whatever, right? Just everyone's perspective about the value of a country is different.
I see. That's very, and I've heard, like, even I met some people from outside the country who, like, you know, because people tend to give Americans a lot of ish for not traveling outside of America.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I'm speaking when I went to San Diego and I met all these people, and they're like, people outside of the U.S. don't understand how big the U.S. is.
Oh, yeah.
And just how much there is just to see in the U.S. alone.
Like, you just saying that is the perfect example is the U.S. compared to Europe. When you travel out of a state in the U.S., in Europe, you're traveling out of a country.
Right.
Yeah. You're in a new country. California to
The whole country.
Arizona, or California to
Oregon.
Nevada. Yeah. New countries. Totally different cultures.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why, that's why I also don't blame Americans when they have that perspective. It's because, like, hey, you didn't have exposure. You didn't have a reason to think that you went out to a new country. You know?
Right.
Because, like, hey, if I was in Spain, if I grew up in Spain and I just said, hey, I'm going to go hop the border today and just head into, like, Portugal or Germany or something, completely different countries, experience, cultures. I mean, technically it happens here. You go from, like, here to Texas, different culture in Texas. Then you go from Texas to Louisiana, which is the next door neighbor. Completely different cultures between Texas and Louisiana. Completely different language even.
Brenda, you're from Texas, right?
Yes. Not from originally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Brenda's from Texas. Okay. let's wrap it there. We're gonna
Yeah.
do a part 2 to this.
Yeah.
Because we didn't even get to talking about the chefing stuff.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk. We only talked like a little bit about food.
Yeah. We're gonna have to do a part 2 to this.
Okay.
So there's a yoga class that's about to start in about 30 minutes.
I got to get
Yeah.
dressed for it.
Yeah, he's doing hot yoga today. I'm not. I'm doing the beginner's class because I need to switch up. I've been doing so much hot yoga and I'm like getting a little fatigued from hot yoga. So we're going to cut it there because we got class and we need to get ready. But there will be a part 2 to this. Josh,
Okay.
thank you for doing this.
All right, bro. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is my boy. You know, we be cooking. He's an amazing chef. Always, you know, having me over, treating us to amazing food. So thank you for tuning in. You know, so I've been wanting to do this thing where I want to do a song recommendations at the end of the podcast episode. So for today, do you have a song recommendation? Oh, also, I didn't tell you, but I'm gonna do my teacher training in June.
Hey.
Yeah. We didn't even get. Yeah, your boy's gonna be doing teacher training for yoga in June. So in the fall time, I'll be a certified yoga instructor. So yeah, we didn't even get to talking about any of that stuff. We had so much we wanted to talk about, but little time.
But the song recommendation has to be "Not Like Us," Kendrick Lamar.
That's the type of time you're on?
Huh?
That's the type of time you're on today? Okay.
Dude, I mean, not only are the bars fire, the beat is fire, the whole vibe. It's like if you didn't know any context about the beef in itself, you'd still be bopping your head. You would still be hitting it, and you'd be like, I don't know what they're talking about, but
All right. So my plan was to go with Easy Runaway by Stick Figure, but I'm going to switch it. I'm going to go with The Ride by Drake and The
just
Weeknd. Yeah. I'm going to go with The Ride by Drake and The Weeknd because, yeah, go listen to that and you'll see why personally, when I tell you, like, when I'm just by myself and I'm listening to that song, I'm just like, one day I'm going to live this life. So The Ride.
that one first,
Yeah.
then listen to "Not Like Us." Eyes gonna get blown.
By Kendrick Lamar, yeah. The Ride by The Weeknd and Drake. It's on the Take Care album.
Yeah.
We'll leave you with that. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.